On August 18, 2026, Taylor Swift sat down at a familiar piano inside the Grammy Museum in Los Angeles and performed a 6-minute medley that sounded, at first, like 3 completely different chapters of her career. One song came from her new work for Toy Story 5, another came from folklore, and the final one was one of the most emotionally famous songs of her career, but Swift had chosen them for a reason. She explained that the songs were connected by a common theme, memory, and the way certain moments from our lives can stay vivid long after those moments are gone. And once you listen to the 3 songs as one story, something interesting happens. The medley starts with a memory. It moves through a relationship that was never fully held onto. Then it arrives at one of Swift's most painful songs about remembering something that has already ended, but there is something different about the ending this time. Instead of leaving the listener trapped in the sadness of the past, Swift appears to bring those memories into the present, and that may be the haunting meaning behind this performance. Taylor Swift's career has always been built around memory, not just remembering events but remembering tiny details, a place, a season, a person, a moment that seemed ordinary when it happened but became important later. That idea has followed her from the beginning of her career. For 20 years, Swift has turned memories into songs. Sometimes those memories have been autobiographical, sometimes they have been fictional, sometimes they have been written from another person's point of view, and sometimes the line between the 3 has deliberately been blurred. That is what makes this new medley so interesting. The performance took place at the Grammy Museum during an event called the Icon Sessions with Taylor Swift, a 20-year retrospective. Before she played, Swift spoke with Recording Academy CEO Harvey Mason Jr. about her career and songwriting. Then she sat down at the same floral piano that had traveled with her during the Eras tour. That detail matters. The piano was not simply an instrument. For millions of fans, it was part of the Eras tour itself. During the tour, Swift used an acoustic section where she performed different songs on guitar and piano. As the tour progressed, she began combining songs into surprise medleys. She explained that she would look for a connection between songs, sometimes through rhythm and sometimes through a shared emotion. This time she found a connection through memory. The first song was I Knew It, I Knew You. It is a very different kind of song from All Too Well. It was written for Toy Story 5 and represents a newer chapter in Swift's songwriting. The song deals with recognition, memory, growing older, and the feeling of looking back at someone or something that shaped you. And that makes it a surprisingly good doorway into the medley, because Swift does not begin with the heartbreak. She begins with remembering, then the performance moves into All Too Well. For longtime Swift fans, that transition carries enormous emotional weight. Too Well first appeared on Red in 2012. Years later, Swift released the extended 10-minute version, allowing the song's story to become even more detailed. It is essentially a song about a relationship remembered through fragments. The power comes from the details. The past is not presented as some vague blur. It is remembered through individual moments. That is why the song has remained so important to Swift's audience. It does not simply say that a relationship ended. It shows what it feels like when the mind keeps returning to what happened, and then something unexpected happens. The medley moves toward August. That song comes from Folklore, an album where Swift deliberately moved away from writing only from her own perspective. Instead, she created fictional characters and interconnected stories. August is part of that world. It tells the story of someone caught inside a relationship that was never truly hers to keep. There is longing, there is summer. There is memory, and there is the knowledge that the moment was temporary. Placed between the other 2 songs, August becomes a bridge. The 3 songs are not telling the same story, but they are asking similar questions. What happens to a moment after it is over? Why do some memories stay so clear? Why can a few seconds from years ago feel more vivid than something that happened yesterday? And why do certain people remain attached to memories even after their lives have completely changed? Swift's answer seems to be that memory gives the past a second life. That is what makes the medley feel almost haunting. The people and moments inside these songs are gone, but the memories remain. And the songs allow them to happen again. This is especially interesting because of where Swift is in her own life now. The Grammy Museum performance was her first public performance after her marriage to Travis Kelce. That does not mean the medley is secretly a coded message about her marriage. Swift herself gave a simpler explanation. She said the songs were connected by the idea of memory and reliving detailed moments from your life and understanding their significance. But context can still change how an audience hears a song. A song written years ago can mean something different when the person singing it has changed. That is one of the fascinating things about growing older. You can return to the same memory without being the same person who experienced it. And Swift has spent much of her career doing exactly that. She revisits old songs, she re-records old albums, she changes arrangements. She performs songs from different periods of her life beside one another. The Eras tour turned that idea into an entire concert. Instead of pretending the past had disappeared, Swift brought every era back onto one stage. The new medley feels like a smaller version of that same idea: 3 different periods, 3 different stories, 1 piano, 1 performance, and 1 theme connecting them: memory. There is also something important about the order. The medley begins with the newest song. Then it moves backward into August, then into All Too Well. That means the performance is not simply traveling forward through Swift's career, it is moving through memory itself. The present reaches backward, one memory leads to another, a newer story touches an older one, and suddenly something written years apart can feel connected. That is exactly what memories do. They do not arrive in perfect chronological order. One moment can remind you of another. A song can bring back a person. A smell can bring back a place. A photograph can suddenly make an old moment feel close again. Swift's songwriting has always understood this. Her songs often work like small-time machines. They take an ordinary detail and preserve it. Years later, that detail can still carry the emotion of the original moment. And perhaps that is why All Too Well works so well at the center of this medley. The song is already about the strange power of remembering. It is about a relationship that ended, but a memory that refused to disappear. When Swift performs it beside August, the connection becomes even stronger. Both songs contain relationships that are temporary. Both are filled with the feeling of looking back, but the new song changes the emotional destination. Knew It, I Knew You does not simply look at memory as something painful, it treats memory as something meaningful. That difference is subtle, and it changes the entire performance. The past is not necessarily something you have to escape. Sometimes you can look back at it and understand what it gave you. That does not mean the painful parts become happy. It means they become part of a larger story, and that may be why Swift chose these songs together. The medley does not erase heartbreak. It does not pretend that the past never happened. Instead, it places old memories beside a newer perspective. That is a very different kind of nostalgia. It is not simply missing the past, it is understanding it. There is another layer to the performance. Swift was celebrating 20 years of her career. Her first album was released in 2006 at the time. She was a teenage country singer trying to establish herself in Nashville. 2 decades later, she was sitting inside the Grammy Museum looking back at the career that followed. During the conversation, she spoke about feeling increasingly connected to her country roots as she gets older. She described those early Nashville influences as part of what shaped her as an artist and songwriter. That makes the timing of the medley especially interesting. She was not only revisiting old songs, she was revisiting the idea of who she was when she first started. The performance came at a moment when fans were already paying close attention to her connection with her early country era. Her seafoam green dress also caused fans to speculate about her debut era and the possibility of a future Taylor's version release. But those theories remain theories. Swift did not announce a release date for a re-recorded debut album during the event, so the dress may have been an intentional nod to her early career, or it may simply have been a fashion choice. This is where Swift's world becomes difficult to separate from fan interpretation. Her fans are trained to look for clues. A color can become a theory, a number can become a theory, a lyric can become a theory, a hairstyle can become a theory, and sometimes those theories turn out to be right. Other times they are simply fans finding patterns in an artist who has spent years encouraging them to look closely. But the medley itself does not need a secret code to be meaningful. Swift already explained the central connection. These songs are about memory. That is the part we can actually confirm. Everything beyond that should be treated as interpretation, and there is plenty to interpret. Think about what happens when the 3 songs are placed together. First comes recognition, then comes a summer that could not last, then comes a relationship remembered in painful detail. It almost feels like watching a person move backward through their own memories, but the performance does not stay there. The music brings those memories into the present. That is the emotional trick. The past is still there. But the person remembering it has changed, and that is something Swift has demonstrated throughout her career. She has repeatedly returned to old material from new perspectives. Too Well itself is an example. A song that had existed for years was expanded and reinterpreted. Old emotions were given new context. Something from the past became relevant again. The same thing happened across the Eras tour. Songs that once belonged to specific albums were placed beside songs from completely different periods. The result was a career that felt less like a straight line and more like a collection of memories. That is why the floral piano matters too. Swift could have performed these songs with a full band. Instead, she chose the intimate setup associated with the acoustic section of the Eras tour: 1 person, 1 piano, 3 songs, a room filled with fewer than 200 people. It was almost the opposite of the massive stadium shows that had defined the Eras tour. And that intimacy fits the theme. Memory is personal. You do not need a stadium to remember something. Sometimes all it takes is 1 song. The most haunting part of the performance may therefore be its simplicity. There are no elaborate effects needed. The songs themselves carry the history. 1 represents a newer chapter. 1 represents a fictional summer that disappeared. 1 represents a real feeling memory that became one of Swift's most famous songs. Together, they create something bigger than any individual song. They create a conversation between different versions of the past. And perhaps that is the real meaning behind the medley. Taylor Swift has spent 20 years turning memories into music. Now she's looking back at those memories from a completely different point in her life. The girl who began writing songs in Nashville is no longer that girl. The young songwriter who wrote All Too Well is not the same person performing it today. The stories in folklore belong to characters she created, and the newest song was written for a completely different fictional world. Yet all of them can exist together, because memory does not care how many years have passed. It connects things that seem unrelated. A summer can remind you of a breakup can remind you of who you were, and who you were can remind you of who you have become. That is what makes this performance more than a simple mashup. It is a look backward, not necessarily because Swift wants to return to the past, but because the past helped create the person standing at the piano now. And maybe that is why the performance feels haunting. Nothing in these songs is happening for the first time. The moments are already over, the relationships have already ended, the characters have already moved on. But for 6 minutes, the memories come back, they overlap, they speak to one another. And then the music ends, the memories remain, and perhaps that is the strange power of Taylor Swift's new medley. It reminds us that the past does not have to disappear for us to move forward. Sometimes, the memories that once hurt the most become the very things that help us understand who we became. And after 20 years of turning moments into songs, Taylor Swift has shown that some memories do not really end. They simply wait for the next song to bring them back.